So welcome back, everybody. And as I said, here we are now for the third session of this year's conference. Having looked so far kind of broadly at the path of the digital decade and then moving on to look at the funding side of things, we're now delighted to move on to look more at the evolving ecosystem, the equipment ecosystem, looking at some of the issues around that and how the development of things such as OpenRAN might impact stakeholder things within Europe. So really looking forward to discussion here. A reminder to all of you out there to please continue to add all of your questions, your comments into the chat bar. Really appreciate all of your input so far. It's been great to have so many questions from you in the panel so far, and please do continue to do that. Once again, there's going to be time at the end of this session where we will put any questions from you to our panelists and get their thoughts on those. But let's move on to the session. It's my pleasure now to welcome to the stage Jeanette Stewart from Analysys Mason. Jeanette, welcome. Good to see you. And as I said, really looking forward to this session. So without further ado, I will pass the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Dan. I'd like to welcome everybody to session 3 of this 5G conference. My name is Jeanette Stewart. I'm a partner in Analysys Mason's Regulation and Policy Consulting team based in the UK. Analysys Mason is one of the sponsors of this conference, so I would just like to thank Dan and thank Forum Europe for inviting us to be involved. The topic of this session is evolution of the 5G supply market. The global 5G supply market is undergoing significant transformation, and so in this session, we will be discussing what the various evolutions that are taking place might mean in the context of the European market. If we can move on to my next slide, please, Dan. I've summarized on this slide some of the key evolutionary themes that we are seeing in the supply market and which we may touch on in this discussion. The cloud-native 5G core is a key enabler of end-to-end network slicing. This enables operators to dimension private slices of a public core network to offer a service tailored specifically to a business need, which is a very important development. Edge clouds are important because they enable services to be provisioned closer to the devices for low latency connections. Cellular networks built specifically for enterprise or for industrial companies, which we generally refer to as private networks, are also an important trend. These might be deployed as dedicated on-premise networks or using a combination of on-premise and public mobile network components. OpenRAN, as Dan mentioned, is one of the key developments that we will be discussing with the panelists in this session. OpenRAN architecture has been defined by organizations such as the OpenRAN Alliance and others to provide a unified way to deploy disaggregated networks. This could enable a far wider variety of hardware or software suppliers to enter the mobile supply market in Europe, which could ease the path for operators towards the more agile cloud-native RANs that can support a wider diversity of 5G use cases that I mentioned earlier. However, these architectures are still immature, and there are various challenges that I'm sure we will discuss in the remainder of this session, things like customization, integration, and also interworking with conventional RANs are all challenges taking some time to address. So in the remainder of this panel session, we will be discussing these topics in more detail, I hope. I'm pleased to be joined in this panel session today by 4 expert speakers to discuss the topic. We will be joined by Peter Stuckmann, Head of Unit in DG Connect of the European Commission, Bo Anderson from PTS, who's also co-chair of BEREC, David Bachman, who's co-president of European Association of Next Generation Telecommunication Innovators. He's also the CEO of NG Voice, who are a provider of containerized architectures. And finally, Olivier Simon, who's director of radio innovation at Orange. So welcome everybody, and we're really looking forward to discussing this. So I would like to move on now to our first speaker, who's Peter Stuckmann, Head of Unit Future Networks, DG Connect in the European Commission. So Peter, over to you.
Good morning, colleagues. Very nice to be with you. And thanks, Janet, for this nice introduction. This is also a good overview of the main trends that we want to discuss. So exciting topics, supply market trends. It's a session that we might not have seen in this kind of conference a couple of years ago. So this shows that it's really coming from a more technical thing to something much more political, much more critical. And this is, of course, first of all, because 5G services are more critical. They're an integral part of our lives, and it's also basis for the digitalization of business, the green transformation of our vertical sector. So against this background, we adopted the 5G Cyber Toolbox. So we will also have a dedicated session coming up just after that, where my colleague Lorena Bosch Alonso will also give an overview there. But just to underline here that the supplier role is critical. So we insisted that member states identify high-risk vendors and apply the necessary restrictions and exclusions. This is already one trend that we can expect and have an impact on the supply markets. This is, of course, cybersecurity is not an option, it's a necessity. We need it now in our networks. Then there's also the longer term issue, what we call sovereignty. You see that also it's priority for the Commission, but also now in the French presidency as a headline topic. So we're of course happy to have 2 of the 3 main suppliers that are European, and we need to keep the capacity to supply the networks, to be able to have a position in the key parts of the supply chain. And this made the supplier issue also in general a geopolitical issue. We can see that also when you look at R&D spending, it has been of course already significant in 5G, but for 6G it's even more. You see really huge programs building up, and we also launched in Europe the new 6G partnership, Smart Networks and Services. And we also see in the member states now much more significant programs with hundreds of millions of public funding for R&D. So then you raised also the question on technology trends and how it will shape the supply markets. So we are of course quite sure, and that came out also of the presentation from Jeanette just before, that the future will be software-based, will be cloud-based. We are seeing already a transformation of the telecom companies to IT companies, and this has started since a while. So it's important that we finance this also in the new 6G partnership, that European players, established ones and new ones, are leading these developments. So if you move to software-based networks, it could make sense to think about opening more interfaces, to have smaller software modules that can be potentially supplied by various suppliers. So here OpenRAN comes in. This is a concept that exists already since a while. It has gained particular interest in recent years and is now accelerated by heavy government support, in particular by countries that see opportunities for their software companies to come into these markets. And of course, by operators that hope to drive innovation with these new architectures and also reduce equipment costs if you go to more off-the-shelf equipment. So 2 points to that context from the Commission perspective. So first, it's important to underline from our perspective, OpenRAN is not the same as diversity. We have to look at the whole supply chain, not only the RAN market, which is very narrow. Think about even if you to disaggregate the full RAN market, are worried about lock-ins if you would have dominant players. Think about what can be then happen in the area of cloud or chips, if there's new dependencies. And we already see also that these markets are heavily in certain sectors, especially, are very, very concentrated. So it's a wider issue. Other dimensions are also important to take into account, not only diversity, we also have to see it from a security risk perspective, performance, efficiency. So what are we doing with these thoughts? So, and what role do we see for governments? So we would say the security issue is, of course, the most pressing one. We have to be sure that when these technologies are coming, that we can trust them. It needs to be mature. It needs to be secure. It needs to be trustable. So there we have a work ongoing with the NIST cooperation group, Network Information Security. That's a setting with the member states and the Commission involved, where we'll develop the toolbox. But now on top of that, we are now having an assessment of OpenRAN and look at the risk and opportunities there, and also the potential measures to ensure that we are comfortable with this technology when it comes. Then we have also our funding programs. So there's a clear role here to facilitate any developments that the market would like to see. So if we see it as market trends or technology trends, we have the Smart Networks and Services Partnership, this towards 6G. We have the Digital Europe program that will come out this year with a new call, also to coordinate the different trials and pilots at European level. We continue to fund research, innovation, and test beds at EU level and national level, but in a technology neutral way. So we won't see a program only on OpenRAN, for example. So it is up to the industry and the researchers to propose the solution they want to develop, and not for governments to pick these solutions. So that's from my side, is in setting a bit the scene from our side, and looking forward to the other presentations and to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Peter. So I would like to now move on to our second speaker, Bo Andersson from PTS in Sweden. He's also co-chair of the Berg Working Group on Wireless Network Evolution. So Bo, over to you. Hello.
Thank you very much, Jeanette, and good morning to everyone, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this very interesting panel and also this interesting conference. I think this is really an interesting subject that is growing on us and also in relevance every year. And just to introduce myself, Bo Andersson, as I said, I'm co-chairing the Wireless Network Evolution Working Group within Berg, together with my colleague Joe Lynch from Comreg. And we would like to talk a bit about how we look at this from our perspective as regulators. And OpenRAN means a software-based network solution based on open and modular interfaces within the radio access network. And as that, OpenRAN aims to make such interfaces more interoperable, and including the hardware side. As a result, of course, hardware and software components may then be provided by multiple suppliers, hence creating competition here. Virtualization and cloudification of these interfaces and other elements may enable operators to run software services on generic hardware. And interoperability is therefore a very central issue. And you could say maybe that essentially OpenRAN is considered a logical next step in the technological development of communications networks here. And Berg, we've already taken steps to further gather information about the attitude and views of telecommunication operators that are active in the European market towards OpenRAN. And we also heard from relevant stakeholders about the potential benefits of OpenRAN during a workshop on mobile infrastructure sharing held in 2020. On the issues of security, the NIS Corporation Group, working with an in-depth analysis of the security implication that was mentioned here also by earlier, of open, disaggregated and interoperable network technology solutions. And that is done under the EU toolbox, and Berg is also providing its support to this work. Building further on these early developments here on OpenRAN, Berg would like to hold or plan to hold a workshop aiming to identify unanswered or uncertain issues about OpenRAN that we can identify. And this work stream may also focus on related topics, of course, here, such as cybersecurity, resilience, and sustainability. And this workshop on OpenRAN is planned to be held with invited speakers from regulators, policymakers, and industry to explore potential future areas of inquiry. And the overarching perspective here would be to understand where there could be bottlenecks, infringing competition, abuses possibly of dominance, security issues, and/or resilience matters where regulatory interventions might be needed sometime. It should be noted, however, that we do not expect here during this workshop or in this work to identify areas for intervention or identify market failures given the nascent state of OpenRAN today. And the workshop might instead provide insights on some topics that could be explored in the future. And the objectives here that I've mentioned, that of course necessitates achieving a certain level of technical understanding of OpenRAN. And we intend to build this knowledge case based by looking at OpenRAN in terms of supply and demand side to get a picture of the vertical chain here. And on the supply side, the first starting with a general overview and get a status update. What is mature and what is the least mature parts with OpenRAN so far? Looking at the programmability and innovation in terms of functionalities of the radio intelligent controller. Looking at the security and OpenRAN certification. Status of the environment for constructing and testing OpenRAN. And whether the status is of the pre-commercial deployments and of course also commercial deployments. The second thing, role of policymakers and regulators to date. What are the latest concerns about potential dominance in OpenRAN in markets, if there is any? Latest concerns about barriers to entry to OpenRAN ecosystem, if there are any of those that we would like to highlight. What are the blockages, if any, to routes to commercialization for new players? Of course, important to see here that we get a competitive environment here, if this is possible as possible. And then the support for trials and different types of initiatives on that and lab solutions here. And other possible topics from this perspective could include industrial policy, as I said, security, general competition issues between suppliers. Looking at the demand side then, from the network perspective, we would like to include the 5G network deployments here and also issues from private networks growing. What about looking at brownfield and comparing it to greenfield situations? How does that? We have Vodafone test activities, for example, and you have the Rakuten activities in the greenfield, for example. And what about rip and replace, if you could call it that? And the, of course, necessary return on research and development investments. How does this look from the network perspective? Customers, of course, important, their perspective, looking at performance and interoperability and security needs that they may have. What are the value propositions there that you might get? What can we get out of this in terms of, for example, potential cost savings and what are the values here? And the new use cases, what benefits here that this type of new available technologies and possibilities might bring. And finally, then, of course, looking into automation and the cloudification of this and the software that will be developed here. And last but not least, growing in importance is the environmental perspective. Could this have an impact on energy consumption and possible power savings here? What are the current conversations on this? Who's leading it? We would like to dig into that also, who that comes out. So, of course, this short description of supply and demand from this perspective is intended to be indicative and as an input to how to organize what we think could be an interesting workshop on this from the Berg perspective. And given that the OpenRAN is very broad and dynamic and early, and the ecosystem is emerging here with many non-traditional players involved. And I think that the development of initiatives focused on furthering innovation are very welcome, as they can contribute to improving and securing our digital future. And such initiatives should be assessed and supported on the basis of aims and principles such as innovation, open markets, European competitiveness, and of course security and strategic interests of the EU. And this is the line of work that we will continue going on. So I think I'll stop there and look forward to the continued dialogue in this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those words, Bo. So we will now move on to David Bachmann, who is co-president of the European Association of Next Generation Telecommunication Innovators. David, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jeanette. And thanks for inviting us. And that means, to include the SME perspective in this whole discussion today. So David, co-president of the European Association of Next Generation Telecom Innovators. Yeah, we founded the short version of the ANCTI at the beginning of 2020. It was founded by 20 to 30 very innovative, 4G, 5G, SMEs, scale-up startups, yeah, that are, have products for the different parts of a mobile network, for the radio access network, for the mobile core, but as well, for the application level. And the reason why we founded the ANCTI was to say, okay, this whole discussion on supplier diversification, the smaller innovative suppliers in Europe should have a voice as well. Yeah. So thanks for including our perspective here and to give us this opportunity. And I think from our perspective, I want to start with a positive framing of what is currently happening. Yeah, I believe that the current disruption of the telecom market, I believe that we are seeing a disruption of the telecom market, is a unique opportunity for Europe to actually build the next generation of 4G and 5G suppliers. Yeah? But we need to move fast, yeah, because if we don't move fast, I think Europe is going to lose out in this whole game, yeah. So why is this the case, and what is required to move fast? I think we've talked about this by now, yeah. It's clear Telcom is turning into a software game, partly into a cloud game, yeah, and this comes with true implications from my perspective. The one is, if you want to be successful as a supplier in the telecom market, you need to know how to scale software, and that is, not necessarily the strengths of the traditional, established suppliers in the market. And secondly, you need to be able to build an innovative ecosystem around you. Yeah, the time of end-to-end delivery of proprietary solutions, I think, has come or is coming to an end. So if you want to be successful, whether it's a European player or a non-European player, you need to be able to build an ecosystem of companies around you, because they are going to be the source or one source of innovation here. Yeah, I think there's maybe the third implication, which is, I think it's an exciting time to be one of the innovative smaller software suppliers in this market. So first, Telcom is turning to a software game. Secondly, Europe needs to act fast. Yeah, why is this the case? We've talked about this. It's clear, very obvious. Europe has been, traditionally has a very strong position in the mobile communications infrastructure market, with Ericsson and Nokia, roughly having 50% market share here. Yeah, but this position is now massively challenged by a number of very successful newly emerging players, mainly coming from the US. Yeah, if we talk about the Mavenir and Microsoft with the acquisition of Affirmed and Metaswitch, but as well, from Asia, if we look at Rakuten. I think what these players do, they have a very interesting combination of ambition level, investment level, and innovation level. Yeah, and this combination is a bit more rare to find in Europe. So if Europe wants to, ensure its innovation and technology leadership in the sector, I think, first of all, we need to do everything possible to strengthen the local ecosystem, right? And this ecosystem is quite unique, to be honest. If you only look at the members of our association of EANCTI, we can already build, a fully software-based 5G network, from the very beginning to the end. Yeah. And so we need to further strengthen this ecosystem. What do I mean by this? Yeah, for me, there are mainly two things that need to be done to strengthen this ecosystem. The first one is the established players and the smaller players need to partner. Yeah, you need to join forces, because this is how you can mature innovation quickly. Yeah? And the second one is we need, we're pretty good in Europe when it comes to R&D and inventing things, but we're not so good at when it comes to building global companies. So we need to scale these smaller players into global players. Yeah, because for us as a software supplier as well, and for the members of our association, it's many times much more easier to be successful outside of Europe than within Europe. Yeah. So my third point is, so what does it all mean in practice? Yeah, I think the short version of this is, if we want to strengthen the European ecosystem for 4G and 5G suppliers, yeah, we need to step up. All of us need to step up. Yeah, and let's maybe go through this one by one. What does it mean for operators? Looking forward to see the orange perspective shared by the next speaker. I think I really want to encourage the European operators to say, okay, start working with smaller suppliers, embrace their innovation, build long-term relationships, help them to mature products and gain field experience. Yeah, I think there are many examples. If you look at Rakuten, that has already been mentioned, where you see that this combination of established players and new players can be very successful. Yeah. Secondly, what does it mean for supplier? Yeah, I think for suppliers, or for the European suppliers, this means everyone needs to develop a tailored approach on how you want to engage with innovative vendors. Yeah, and how you want to include the innovation into your product. And this again, I think this doesn't stop with the radio access network, but this as well holds true for the mobile core and anything that is built on top on this, on the application level. Yeah, and from my day-to-day experience as a CEO of a software company, I can tell you the experience of getting into a partnership with a hyperscaler is very different than the one to get into a partnership with a tier one supplier. Yeah, when it comes to getting dedicated support and so on. I think they're good news as well. Yeah, players are stepping up. Here I'd like to mention Ericsson. Yeah, and Ericsson and our organization are currently trying to find innovative ways on how we can, bring the established players together with the smaller ones to jointly, foster an open and competitive ecosystem in Europe. Third point, we have the operators, we have the suppliers. What does this mean for investors? Yeah, if we're wondering why so many of the new players come from the US, it's worth to look at the US at the investment level. Yeah, and the US alone in the last 5 years, 10 times as much money has been invested into 5G startups compared to Europe. Yeah, so investors need to step up. Do not shy away from deep tech technologies. Yeah, it might be a bit harder to understand than the food delivery service, but it's worth the investment. And by looking at investors, I'm clearly including the venture arms of the operators and suppliers here as well. So last point, what does it mean for the policymakers? Yeah, I think from my perspective, there are mainly two things. The one is, let's not only focus on R&D, but as well on procurement. Yeah, what can we do to create real deployment opportunities for the smaller players in combination with the established ones? And the other one is, to stay and ensure technology neutral regulation, yeah, and push standardization wherever you can, because that's the only way on how the smaller players, can become part of the broader game. Yeah. So, I believe really that this is a unique opportunity. Yeah, that's why we are here. And I would really encourage everyone, whether it's, supplier, operator, policymaker, or investor, to step up here so that we can jointly build and further strengthen the European 4G and 5G ecosystem. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. So as you say, it's exciting times, I think, for both you and your organisation members. So thanks for joining us. So I'd like to go on now to the final speaker, who is Olivier Simon, Director of Radio Innovation at Orange. So Olivier, over to you. Hello.
Thank you, Jeanette, and good morning, everyone. My name is Olivier Simon. I'm in charge of radio innovation for Orange, and I'm also sitting at the OpenRAN Alliance Executive Committee and TIP Technical Committee. So, as already discussed with other speakers, OpenRAN is a very big topic, but I would like to take a bit of altitude and remind that from an operator perspective, the most important thing that we need to do is to deploy 5G currently. And 5G in Europe is not the area where the deployment is the fastest, but is also it's a very good. However, in average, if you're looking at the whole global thing, so why there are areas such as Japan or Korea, for instance, that could go faster than Europe to deploy 5G. I would say that the first thing is that if you're looking at the date when operator could deploy a new technology, it is coming with the new frequency allocation. And the countries and the regions which are organizing the best, I would say, frequency allocation in due time and so on, are generally the first to deploy the new technology. You cannot deploy a new technology without frequency, so it's a first, difference. If we're looking again at Korea and Japan, there is a second difference that create more means for operator to deploy faster. It is that revenue per user are much higher, typically twice as much as what we have in most European countries. And so this difference is also a key factor for a rapid investment in 5G. Of course, there are other things that we can do better in Europe, such as market fragmentation. If we can align as much as possible, and we may discuss that later, the rules for deploying the new technology, the rules, the timing, and so on. Then for operators, this creates some volumes in different countries that make the investments more attractive, I would say. That makes also the discussion with device makers more, let's say, easier to make sure that the devices are coming with the right characteristic for European market. We can also progress in some areas. In some countries, for instance, we have difficulties to get site authorization. We have different regulation relative to EMF, for instance, electromagnetic field, the level of electromagnetic field that we can operate in different countries. So there are things that we can improve to be as efficient as possible for 5G deployment. Finally, before going to OpenRAN, RAN sharing is also a key thing in Europe. You may know that we have more than 50% of the radio sites in Europe that are shared between at least two operators. In general, it's two operators. And RAN sharing gives the ability to deploy faster, quicker, to have more service for our customers with a given level of investment. So it's something that we need to continue to secure in time and to progress in the way RAN sharing could be deployed. And for instance, it's a transition to the OpenRAN discussion because OpenRAN can improve quite a lot RAN sharing. Currently, we have basically three possibilities as operators. Either we don't share anything, either we share what we call the passive infrastructure, so basically the towers, the buildings where the sites are deployed, or either we share the radio access network as a whole to some extent. With OpenRAN, there is a new possibility that is coming thanks to virtualization and thanks to open interface. We can share all the hardware, but we can dedicate all the software. This means that the two operators, which are sharing a network, for instance, could have their own software. Their own software vendor could deploy the software at different time, could also have a set of parameters that is fully independent. And it's something that could help to progress in the investment or investment efficiency, because the way we are sharing should be as much as possible should protect the differentiation between the operator, but at the same time should help to manage the cost. So finally, on OpenRAN, the message is that it is really the sense of history. If you're looking at some other domains, such as the core network, such as service platforms, such as even the smartphones, you see that at a time when you can manage hardware to software decoupling, then you create much more dynamicity, much more innovation, because it's faster to do software than to do software and hardware that are coupled. And this is just what's happening now in the radio access network area. We start to have the possibility to have generic hardware and deploy software that is developed kind of independently from the hardware. And this is something that you cannot stop. And so the question in Europe is about whether we want to lead this train, or either we take the risk to be behind in this train. And we, as operator, we are really pushing for European ecosystem to be a leader, which means that we probably need more discussion and frameworks with policymakers to secure that in 2030 we will still lead or be in a very good position in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier. So that completes all the introductory presentations from everybody. So while everybody's joining, I will just say we have around about 30 minutes now for discussion and questions. We do have several questions coming in from the audience, but I think before we move on to those, I wanted just to give you all a chance to come back on what you've heard from the fellow speakers here. So perhaps if we can maybe go to Peter and Bo first. From the policy making perspective, David set out a very coherent call to action, if you like, and various steps that we could take, and suppliers working together, investment, not just public but private investment as well, and more focus on procurement rather than R&D. Olivier, I think, made an interesting point just at the end there about the extent to which Europe wants to sort of drive the train, as you said, Olivier, so lead this and therefore take the risk in an area which perhaps is still nascent, versus waiting until there's perhaps greater choice and sort of consistency in the solution. So Peter, I wonder, what's your reaction to this, and then we'll come to Paul after.
Yeah, I think call for action from David, indeed, very interesting. And I think it was more like, as Europe, let's move into this, let's build up this ecosystem. I think that's we really, of course, support as in the scope as we see it. And that was also came out from Olivier, the cloud to software cloud. We have to see this as trends that are coming, and we have to position ourselves. So that's clear. So that we're supporting. But we wouldn't take a role where we say now we're mandating things, we're picking technologies, we say this has now to be done. I think it should still be a market-driven process. So I think that's maybe where we would balance it.
Thank you. And Bo, did you have any comments you wanted to make?
I think I could second that what Peter said, and I think it's of course this is creating possibilities for increased competition in maybe new levels in the vertical structure of this technology or this business. But I think it's also opening for this. At the same time, you need to make sure that you maintain the security levels and standardizations and in all levels. I think it's you have a lot of possibilities, and from our role perspective, I think we are looking at it from, of course, the technology neutral perspective and our enablers to make the market stable, and thus creating a competitive environment that kind of induces in investments and then gives those incentives. I think our work with harmonizing this, so we have rules and regulations that kind of and implementations of those that look the same and work the same from a European perspective would help this development from that perspective. So I think this is really important from our end. I think updating guidelines and things like that was mentioned earlier today, and I think this is an important part to react to the needs of the industry here.
Thank you very much. So moving on to David and Olivier then. David, first of all, so you said you were interested to hear from Olivier as a representative from a big European MNO. You've heard what he said. He did talk about some sort of more traditional challenges, if you like, about European MNOs, the traditional RANs, the revenue squeeze, etc. Do you have any reaction from what you've heard?
Yeah, but I think at the same time there was a clear commitment to the disaggregation of software and hardware, and to say the further we can cut this whole pie, the easier it is for smaller players to play a role there. Yeah, and I'm not sure whether this is the OpenRAN discussion, because it's always hard to even know what OpenRAN is or what ORAN is and what concept we are referring to. But as long as we have a discussion where we say we standardize things, we disaggregate software and hardware, we make it easier for smaller players to play a role, and this is still technology neutral. I think then this is absolutely in line. I think my question would be to say, okay, how can we make sure that the smaller, and I think that was in line with Olivier's statement, how can we make sure that the smaller players are successful within Europe as well, with all of the challenges, right? Because as I said, for us today, it's much easier, to work with operators and suppliers outside of Europe than in Europe, because the ability to interact with these smaller software suppliers is already, more structured or more trained, I would say. Yeah.
And can you say a bit more about why that is then?
I think if you look at from my perspective, if you look at the, newly emerging suppliers out there, most of them have a much stronger software background, and they've been used to the fact that they need to cooperate and work with other people products very closely from the very beginning. So if you look at the hyperscalers, they have a super structured onboarding process for these smaller, independent software suppliers like us, where you get a lot of dedicated support and so on. While let's say these traditional suppliers, didn't need to embrace that innovation so much because they had their, end-to-end solution, right? So I think it's now just something, a new kind of interaction format that needs to be learned and implemented, if you like to, to take the telecom universe to the next level, So I think it's more a question of there was no need. Other people had the need for the last decade, so they have built, very well-trained interaction formats, and this is what we now need to do as well as part of the European ecosystem.
Thank you very much. And finally, Olivier, I wondered if you wanted to come back on what you've heard here and maybe comment on, anything else on the sort of how do we encourage this pro-investment regime, market in Europe, but also just thinking about how to solve some of these challenges of, the journey into software.
Yeah, sure. But maybe before talking about the investment, I may come back on security because during the last 3 or 4 months, there were a lot of discussion about security of in OpenRAN. What does it mean, and so on. I think there were a bit of confusion in this debate. So the first thing to say is that the OpenRAN concept is mostly supported in terms of standardization by the ORAN Alliance specifications. And this alliance has its role to play in security, and they have started to do so. There is a specific group that is called the Security Focus Group in this alliance that creates some specification to secure some of the interface to put the right security principles in this OpenRAN area. But this is just the step of standardization. In order to secure a system, it's not only a matter of standardization, it's also a matter of implementation. When you implement a system, you need to take a number of security decisions in the way you put the parameter, in the way, of course, you select your vendors and so on. What I can tell you is that at the current stage of standardization, the OpenRAN as standardized by the ORAN Alliance can be very well secured. It's just the fact that it's not coming alone, it's coming with the implementation phase. And I think the operators and the vendors participating in this ecosystem are responsible to manage such security. Another thing that is maybe confusing for some people is that when you open up a system, when you create open interface, open APIs, and so on, then you increase, of course, the visibility of the system in terms of security. But at the same time, you increase the security of the system itself. If you're looking at Linux, for instance, Linux is an operating system that is a fully open source. So the surface of attack is very high, but at the same time, the fact that it's really open has enabled a lot of people, companies, academics, and so on, startups, to look at the system and to secure it. And we expect with OpenRAN that the same could happen. Now, just coming back to your point on investment and also on David's point about challengers and incumbents, the good thing with OpenRAN is that in some of the subsystem, it lowers really the barrier to entry, because instead of having to build like a full RAN system with 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, with hardware, software, instead of having to do all this R&D, you can concentrate on some aspects, such as the RIC, such as the CUDU software, such as only the hardware, and so on. And it means that the level of R&D that you need to invest to play in this market is lower than with existing, let's say, closed RAN market. But this does not mean that the existing large vendors, especially the European ones, will not play a key role in this market. To be honest, if you're looking at standardization and what's happening in the ORAN Alliance, you see that the two European vendors are really active. They are probably the most active players overall in the ORAN Alliance. And this means that they start to get ready for this market. The only thing that could be questioned is how quick they want to be there, they want to go there, and what part of the subsystem they want to manage. But clearly, they are there, and they are part of this ecosystem together with the smaller vendors.
Thank you very much, Olivier. So we have a whole number of comments actually from the audience here. So I'm just going to ask a few questions, if I may. So the first question is, what is the panel's view of virtualization of network functions on public versus private cloud? Is there a more detailed EU policy required to guide this area? So Peter, I wonder, do you want to try that one?
Yeah, or maybe Bo is following the details also of the NIS discussion on the security. First, from a general perspective, I would say it's a matter of synergies, what you want to do with your network. And there, I think Olivier and David have, I guess, ideas. When you reuse cloud infrastructure for network function, but also for other things. So that's of course a consideration. And on the other side, you have the security. And there we indeed have to look into the different risks and dependencies that might be coming in terms of cloud, and then see if there are any preference or measures that are necessary or not. So this is then already getting quite detailed, but this I would see as the issues that you would have to look into for that.
And Bo, I mean, coming to you and just thinking about the private cloud. Obviously, if you've got private deployers not coming from a telco background, there are obviously different risks there. Do you want to say something on that?
I could say, and I also think it's important to, of course, the security issues here are still developing, and we're, as Oliver pointed out, this is a way of moving forward, and it's also in the implementation phase that this will be important. And I think it's from the cloud perspective, you see a lot of possibilities of increased possible choices and competition here. But also, if things move further into the cloud, it may be that this is another area where there may be dominance, and this could be definitely, I think, another perspective. What happens then if this is moved into one dominant cloud service? And I think that this is another way that we need to also look at the type of developments and possibilities for new entrants, and to really get the capabilities of this new availability of choices. So I think we really need to follow this, and it's still early, and I think the work being done in different groups here, both from the security perspective but also on the competition perspective, is really important to maintain here to get this. And if this will mean more or less EU regulation is very early to say, and I think we should make sure that we do it where it's needed and it's doing a good job. That's really the importance.
Thank you. So I'll move on to another question. I think this one is for you, Olivier. So the question is, a year ago, there was a groundbreaking step to create an industry MOU between the 4 leading MNOs, DT, Vodafone, Orange and Telefonica. Do you think OpenRAN is mature enough to become a new industry approach that will fundamentally change the vendor landscape, or is it just an overrated phenomenon that will remain mostly a marginal phenomenon? Olivier, over to you.
Yeah, no, it's not at all a marginal phenomenon for the main reason that it's the technology trend, and that again it will happen. It may take time, but it will happen. Whatever we, as operator or vendor, we do. Again, when you start to be capable to decouple hardware and software, it creates so much innovation that you cannot just resist. So it will happen. Then another question is the maturity, where we are today. And where we are today is that we see many trials. We start to see some commercial use cases in the domain of either rural or indoor or greenfield. And in general, these domains are a bit easier from a technology perspective than a greenfield network. The first reason is that in order to do such use case, you generally need 1, 2, or 3 frequency, where brownfield operators such as us, we operate typically 7, 8, or 9 frequencies. So in terms of dimensioning, it's not at all the same thing. Another difference is that we operate 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, which is still a bit difficult at the stage of maturity of OpenRAN, and we operate 5G with massive MIMO technology. I cannot enter into detail, but it's the main 5G technology, the most important 5G technology that enable to multiply by 3 of maturity of OpenRAN to deliver. So this means that what you will see in 22 and 23 will be, let's say, easier use case, rural, indoor, greenfield, and probably 24, 25, the maturity of OpenRAN will start to be good enough to really compete with a traditional system, including for urban areas, including where we have 7, 8, 9 frequency, including where we have massive MIMO, but it's still not yet fully ready for that.
Thank you. So before we move on to the next question, David, I wonder if you might want to come in on that. So just thinking about Olivier's time frame there, which is kind of a few years to go from the sort of more predictable traffic loads of rural, indoor, greenfield into the sort of scaling up that you mentioned, not until the middle of this decade into the sort of larger areas, the multiple frequencies. What's your reaction on that? Can we afford to wait that long?
Well, I would try to broaden the discussion, and move away from this, only OpenRAN piece, right? Because I think that the fact that Telcom is moving into software, impacts all of the different parts of a telecom network. And I think the task is now to make sure that the European players that are involved in these different parts, get strengthened over the next 5 to 10 years. Because I think the one important question is to say who are going to be the European, winners, if you like, of the whole OpenRAN or software debate. So I'm not going to give any predictions on when OpenRAN is mature for whatever, but I think already today we have many software-based elements, of a virtual radio access network and so on, that can be deployed, that can be further matured, that are ready today. And we have shared a few ideas and concept on how this could look like, with the buzzword of simple RAN. So I think let's act now. And there is already sufficient software-based innovation that we can use today.
Thank you, David. So there's another question from the audience, which is about examples we can gain from other markets. So the example given in the question here is South Korea, where the government created a tailored institutional arrangement, the question says, that allowed Korea to be at the forefront. Can Europe learn from these international examples? So I know we've mentioned South Korea already, but we also mentioned Japan and Rakuten. What's our view on what Europe can learn from the other regions? Peter and Bo, do you want to address that first?
Okay, maybe Bo, I'll leave you to start now, and then I can step in later.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's always. I think it's part of our job to learn from others and try to be as networking as possible and see what's going on in different regions and parts of the world, not just our own side. So I think it is really important. So I'm sure, without being able to just pinpoint a specific example in the O-RAN business, I think it's really important that we have an open mind here and look at other markets and see the developments and also to compare and benchmark. So this is an important side for our European competitiveness to be open for this and see what's going on. So I think I definitely see that as important.
And Olivier and David, do you have any specific examples from other markets that you might want to call out? And not thinking specifically about OpenRAN here, but just kind of about sort of general 5G evolution and that encouraging investment.
We can talk about Japan, which is close to Korea. What you see in Japan is interesting. That there are strong incentives from the government to deploy 5G for both the service that it but also for their industry. They are encouraging Japanese vendors to provide some piece of equipment. By the way, in an OpenRAN flavor, on encouraging also the operators to be let's say open and let's say kind of mix and match different solutions, and they are probably also helping the operators to play a role in building this ecosystem, which is not always I mean easy. We need very good cooperation between operators and policymakers in order to create the condition for operators to manage the ecosystem or to help the European ecosystem, because as operators we cannot do that alone, because it would simply be let's say problematic in terms of competition laws. And so I think in the OpenRAN domain, we need to progress in the cooperation between operators and policymakers to get to push the ecosystem. This is also the sense of what we have written in the paper that we have crafted with other European operators recently.
Thank you. And David, anything you wanted to add on this point?
No, I think it's very much in line with what I just said in my introduction remarks. Yeah. So if we want to catch up what needs to happen, if we want to ensure our innovation and technology leadership, the one is the existing established players, and I would include the operators, need to team up with the smaller innovative players. Yeah, that is number one. Yeah, if we don't get this, as a corporation going, I think it's going to be very hard. And the second one is to say we need to scale the player. So if we talk about capabilities, what are capabilities? What does it mean for Europe to have strong capabilities, in 5G? It means companies. Yeah, that's all. It's companies that are able to sell their product on a global level. Yeah, and so I think that is the second part. We just need to have a very clear, structured approach on how we want to, scale these companies, and that normally comes with, real life. I rather believe they're in the market than in anything else. Yeah. That you have people that are excited about your product, and that get the opportunity to scale it further, to get the investment. Maybe there's some matching of investment between the private and the public ones. If you look at these examples, all of these different mechanisms can be found there.
Thank you very much. And just on your introductory remarks, David, there was another question, if I can ask you. Can you say something more about what you mentioned about funding? You said not so much a focus on R&D, but more on procurement. Can you just say a little bit more about what you meant there about procurement?
Yeah, it's. I didn't mean to say that we should change the procurement processes, right? I think as it's sent here, how operators should procure their deployment. But what I try to say is to say we are normally very good in R&D. Yeah, R&D funding is given to big academic institutions and so on. Yeah. But for a smaller player like us, that is absolutely irrelevant. Yeah, and even the existing funding mechanisms that exist take a lot of time. The amount of funding that is available doesn't really match the ambitions. Yeah, and one of my big hopes, and I couldn't participate in the earlier session on the different funding opportunities, was that the Recovery and Resilience Fund is going to create a few of these joint deployment opportunities, where say, we're not only going to fund at the very early stage, but we're going to make sure that we, initiate this kind of, cooperation between different players, whatever, to build a ARPANET-like 5G network at all European universities. Yeah, just to bring up an idea. Yeah, I think there are many good ideas where you can, cause the public objective, with strengthening a certain industry. I think that is something that is worth to be explored in more detail.
Thank you, David. So I'd like to move back to another topic that we mentioned, which was about security. So we talked about security challenges, perhaps in the OpenRAN implementation, but also sort of more generally the sort of end-to-end 5G core security, incorporating cloud, etc. There's a question for Peter and Bo. Could you say more about when we expect to see the OpenRAN security analysis from the NISCG?
Yes, happy to give an update here. So we're now in a stage where we have already quite good substantial inputs and now consolidating that. So I would expect like in 6-8 weeks that we would have something hopefully that we can show. What will be published of that we have to see. Yeah, so this is a bit the time frame that I'm seeing now.
Thank you, Peter. And for you, Bo, is there a date set for the Berg ORAN workshop that you mentioned in your opening remarks?
Thank you, Jeanette. Thank you for the question there. It will be held in Q2. So, but we have not set the exact date yet, and we'll come back with that later on as soon as possible, rather, because we're looking for a date that will not collide with so many other things, so we can get a good attendance, basically. But during Q2, it is planned.
Q2, thank you very much. So we just have 5 minutes remaining. There's one more question from the audience, and then we will just wrap up after that. So the final question was, are we likely to see true mix and match OpenRAN? Or is it more going to be pre-integrated designs from bigger vendors? How important will European vendors be compared to those in other markets? So there's quite a lot to unpick there. Maybe David, starting with you, are we likely to see this true mix and match? I mean, this is what your organization is trying to develop.
Yeah, well, good question. Yeah, I think time is going to tell. I think what we need to make sure is that whatever is built in this way, that it's open to any kind of additional innovation by European companies and players. That it's really a standardized, open, disaggregated kind of model. Yeah, I think at the same time, it's fair to assume that partners that have worked successfully in one situation are gonna, work successfully in another situation. Yeah, so that you're not always gonna change a winning team at any point in time. Yeah. But I guess what counts from my perspective at the end, that even if we see this, Dell or Rakuten kind of deployments in Europe, that this comes with a strong, commitment to the European ecosystem and the European vendors and the European, scale up and startup community, right? I think that is the main requirement that everyone needs to make sure, whether from an operator procurement side, or I think it should be as well in the interest of those that are deploying these networks.
Thank you, David. And Olivier, from your perspective, I mean, how do you see this integration challenge? And the Rakuten example, I think, shows how much Rakuten as an operator had to put into bringing its solution together. How do you see that within Orange?
Yeah, I think you will see both models. The first model is a kind of pre-integration model, and Rakuten, as you said, they started a new business to kind of sell a pre-integrated RAN to operators. And you will see as well best of breed, I would say, approach that is based on mix and match, especially for large network and especially for operators who want to really manage this mix and match and manage the integration and trying to achieve the best performance with this best of breed approach. And it will depend on use cases, and it will depend also on the resources, the R&D resources that you can find in integrators or in operators. The more you have resources, the large operators such as AT&T, such as NTT Docomo, they are already doing a lot themselves in terms of integrations. Of course, the smallest operator don't have the means, so they will have to take something that is pre-integrated. And the ones in the middle, it will depend on their own technical strategies.
Thank you very much. So, I mean, obviously, we've raised a whole host of issues here. I think we could have a whole conference just on this topic, but we need to close up this session. So, Peter, any final reactions from you based on what we've heard?
Yeah, a couple of interesting points that I picked up also for our to-do list, let's say. So one was, of course, the financing point that you also came back to, Jeanette and David explained. Indeed, what kind of funding is suitable. So, of course, cooperation is important, and programs already help that bring players together. We have also a working group in the Smart Networks and Services for those that are participating in the program and in the association that can interact and think about a common vision and common roadmap. But in terms of funding, indeed, we also have this 5G innovation thinking, and we had a study on venture capital. And this is also something that you find in some recovery plans, not only direct grants, but you also think about funds that you can set up and really make available venture capital to really move into this for the smaller players. So that's also something that we will continue to push. And then on the other side of the cooperation, there was also a comment. I don't know who it was, like giving the possibility to government private cooperation. And there we really, of course, have programs in member states for software-based networks, OpenRAN, and we are thinking to have something also in the context of security, where, of course, there is a clear role of the government to have this project or coordination action as part of the Digital Europe program, where this could be a platform where member states or authorities could come together with European players and together develop this ecosystem, and especially for these aspects where public authorities should give guidance or take back action items and facilitate. So yeah, so both aspects I think we're doing, but we're happy to indeed take away today also the thoughts and shape this.
Thank you very much, Peter. And Bo, anything from you?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's been a lot of very interesting things that have been brought up here, and as you say, we could probably continue this for quite some time, and we will, I hope. But I think it's from my perspective, I think finding the balance between having the enough security level in this development, and at the same time maintaining the level playing field and the competitive situation where you have possibilities for new entrants into the OpenRAN ecosystem. I think then that kind of will create new business opportunities, and thus also create effects on the positive side for the value maintained in our ecosystem. So I think finding that balance from a regulatory perspective is really important, and I think we need to continue to talk to each other to learn how to do this in a good way.
Thank you, and I think there's a lot of food for thought for your ORAN workshop later on this year.
Indeed, so thank you very much.
I'd like to thank all the panelists, thank the audience as well for your questions. Dan, shall I hand back to you?
Thank you, Jeanette. Yeah, that's great. And yeah, just to echo again your thank to all our panelists, to Olivier, David, Bo and Peter. Thank you all. Really, really interesting session. And Jeanette, thank you to you as well for, as ever, expertly moderating the discussions as well. So thank you all so much. And as I think you've all alluded to there, there's definitely a lot that was discussed that's going to be continuing, and a lot more to go on. And yeah, looking forward to hearing a continuation of these discussions going forward. But thank you all so much. Really, really interesting. So we're now going to have a short lunch break. So we have overrun very slightly by about 5 minutes or so. So apologies for that, but I'm sure you understand that there's been lots to discuss. So we have a short break, around about 40 minutes or so. And then we're back after lunch with session 4, which is going to be continuing some of the discussions that we've just heard there. Is going to be focusing specifically on cybersecurity. So security, an issue that's been raised in that session and this morning. So we've got a session that's going to be looking specifically at that. Before we then wrap up today's proceedings, looking a bit further forward, maybe looking beyond 5G and starting to look at the journey towards 6G. So those sessions are still to come. So you do have a 40-minute break now. A reminder, if you did want something to do during your lunch break, that they do have the showcase sessions that are available to watch on the on-demand area, which you can find on the left-hand menu bar. So you'll find 5 specific showcase sessions, which you're able to watch at your convenience in the on-demand area. So please do go and check that out. And see what's in store there. And otherwise, we're back here on the main stage, as I say, in around about 35 minutes now at 1:45 for the next session on cybersecurity. Thank you again to Jeanette and all the panelists. Enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you shortly.
Hello everyone, my name is Egon Schulz from Huawei Munich Research Center in Germany. 6G is a common vision of our ICT industry future. 6G will be the future platform for everything we do in our daily life and work. 6G is global. We are excited that we will have the opportunity to participate shaping 6G with our friends and partners in the European research community. Europe will play a leadership role to create 6G. Thank you for your attention.
My name is Filippo Gianti from Qualcomm. 2022 is the year of 5G millimeter wave in Europe. Decisions will be made by key countries, key operators, and key device vendors to roll out this technology. Using both 5G millimeter wave and mid-band, operators can offer the multi-gigabit speeds and the massive capacity required in what is a video-first, uplink-driven, post-pandemic world. I will show you how operators can increase up to 8% their annual revenue by rolling out 5G millimeter wave in these high-density, everyday locations, while saving up to 75% of their costs. Join me for this exciting showcase in the on-demand area.
Hi, my name is Marta Suarez. I am the president of the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance, and I'm very excited to participate in this event and also to invite you to our showcase entitled Ensuring Wi-Fi Connectivity in a Digitally Connected Gigabit European Society. In that showcase session, we are going to cover the last updates, and we're going to talk about that technology that's omnipresent in our lives, that is Wi-Fi, and why it is so important and crucial for the next decade goals in terms of connectivity. So don't miss our session. You can find it on the on-demand area of the event platform. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Calvin Bahia, and I'm a principal economist at GSMA Intelligence. I have the pleasure to invite you to watch our showcase, where my colleague Caroline Butler will present the findings of our new study that explains how policymakers can carry out a socio-economic cost-benefit analysis for different authorization models for the 6 GHz frequency band. This includes both licensed and unlicensed options. It also presents the results of applying such an analysis for 12 countries. You can find the showcase on the on-demand area of the platform, and we hope you find it useful and interesting. Thank you very much.